On today's episode of Tips from the Top Floor, we'll dig out the pixel buckets again to discuss the differences between larger and smaller pixels on your sensor and why they aren't as bad as you might think. This episode is brought to you by discoverthetopfloor.com. Join us on a photo tour to the Arctic, to Asia, or to Europe. In 2018, we'll go to photograph the wild northwest of Ireland, the amazing Lofoten in Norway, and a very special desert-themed photo tour to Morocco. Join a group of like-minded people and learn to do the photography you have always dreamed to do. Find out more at discoverthetopfloor.com. This is Tips from the Top Floor, episode 815 for Thursday, the 22nd of March, 2018.
Tips from the top floor, tips from the top, alright, from the top floor.
Hey and welcome, episode 815 of Tips from the Top Floor, the photography show about all things, well, the show about all things, okay, I'll come in again. Hey, hello, welcome, it's Chris. This episode is about pixel sizes. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's about. I'm pre-recording, I'm in a bit of a, how would you call this? Frenzy. I told you I'm on a ship. I'm still somewhere on the sea at this point, I guess, or in a fjord up in Svalbard on the two-mast schooner on the Norderlicht, and we're probably hanging out, having some fun, having a beer or two, and just enjoying the time. The entire transfer from northern Norway, from Tromsø up to Svalbard or Spitsbergen is, if it's a smooth ride and if it's no ice and stuff in the way and the weather is not against us, it's just a few days, just 3 or 4 days. But the whole thing is planned to be, I think, 12 days. Let me check my calendar. Is it really 12 days? It's in that range at least. And as a result, we have planned plenty of time to not just make this like a rush, but make it enjoymentful. No, make it enjoyable. That's the word I'm looking for. Make it enjoyable, hanging out with friends and being out there away from reception. No mobile phone, no internet, no nothing. It's going to be amazing. Or I'll hate it. I'll see. No, but I'm totally looking forward to this. It's fun, and if you're listening to this, I'm almost through it and almost back. Next episode, I will be back here in Germany in the Viewfinder Villa, and I'll be reporting back to you on that journey. Anyway, let's get to Ryan.
Yeah, hi Chris, it's Ryan calling from South Australia, in Australia. Firstly, thank you very much for your show, it's amazing. Now, I'm hoping you can dispel or explain some sensor magic to me. I'm currently going through the process of probably updating my D7100 through to the D750. Now, some of the things I assume is the D750 has better image quality than the D7100. Now, the D750 is full frame, D7100 is crop sensor, but they both have very similar megapixel count. So my question is, does the D750 have larger pixels? And if so, why does a larger pixel mean better image quality? I hope you can help me with this, and once again, thank you very much.
Hey Ryan, pixel size. Okay. Your question, why does a larger pixel mean better image quality? Well, first of all, if you have two different size sensors and both have the same amount of pixels, that usually means that the pixels on the larger sensor are bigger. And with bigger, we usually mean they have a bigger light-sensitive surface area. And that's important because, depending on how the sensor is built, there's not just light-sensitive pixels on there. There is wiring on there. There are transistors on there. There are lots of little tiny bits of electronics on that sensor that have to fight over the surface against the light-sensitive part. And the BSI, the backside illuminated ones, kind of flip that on its back, so the electronics are on the back, and it's more light-sensitive surface, which is important. But in general, bigger usually means more light-sensitive surface area. And by the way, this is why film is so awesome, because it's only light-sensitive. There's no electronics. But I digress. And yes, bigger pixels often translate to better image quality. Now let's define image quality in this context first. it means the uniformness between adjacent pixels. If they are the same brightness for the same thing that you expose on them, it means you have less noise in the photos, because noise is a difference in brightness of different pixels. And B, they have a better ability to resolve different brightness levels, which results in better tones overall. And those are kind of the two main things in terms of quality in relation to the pixel size. Well, why is that? And let me bring out my old analogy, the buckets. You've heard me talk about these. I'll do it again in this episode. It's an analogy that I almost always resort to because it really helps explain the difference between bigger and smaller pixels. It's not perfect. It'll fall down at one point, but you'll get the idea. Imagine the pixels on your sensor to be buckets, and imagine the photons falling on those pixels are raindrops. Now, you have a shutter. In the case of the buckets, that's a lid. And to expose, you take that lid off the bucket, and then the raindrops fall into the bucket. And when you're done with the exposure, you put the lid back on. And now you measure how full that bucket is. Is it empty? Then it means that no raindrops/photons have hit it. That would translate to a black pixel. Or is the bucket full? That would translate to a white pixel. Or is the bucket half full? That's somewhere, it's a half bright pixel. Now let's go extreme and replace those buckets with thimbles. Those little things you put on your fingers when you sew. And try the same thing again. Tiny thimbles now, tiny lids. Take the tiny lid off, let it rain onto the thimble and into the thimble, and once you're done exposing, put that tiny little lid back on. Now imagine, in which of the two scenarios would you be more accurate in measuring how full the bucket or that thimble is? That's pretty obvious, right? It's a bucket. They are much larger, and a few more or less raindrops won't make that much of a difference, while with the thimble, let's say the difference between 5 or 6 raindrops might be a huge difference in relation to the size of the thimble. Now, we can take this analogy even further, and we do this right after these messages. Well, I should have said right after this message, because there's only one sponsor and it's the quickest one we've ever had. WeTransfer.com. WeTransfer is all about making the creative process easier for everyone. They built their site to be the simplest way to share big files around the world for free. And you as a photographer might have to do that from time to time to get photos to your clients. There's no sign-in, no offer codes, no password to forget. Just upload, send, and get back to making what you make. 40 million people use WeTransfer to send and receive files every month. And since day one, they've devoted 30% of their ad space to showcasing creative people from around the world, from musicians to illustrators to photographers, and of course to podcasters like me. So in that spirit, we're skipping the rest of this 60-second ad and getting right back into the podcast. WeTransfer.com. You make WeTransfer. Okay, let's go back to the buckets and the thimbles and take the analogy a bit further. Guess how changing the ISO on your camera works. And let's try to stick with the buckets and thimbles again. You obviously can't change the size of the buckets, but what you can do is you can do a bit of math. You measure. Let's say you double the ISO. You measure how much is in the bucket, and it's the same thing. You expose, you measure, and then you multiply what you measured times 2. It's that simple. So to get a white pixel, you now only need to fill half the bucket, which means the whole thing is more sensitive. Now again, imagine doing that same thing with a thimble, which is not as precise as the bigger bucket. Now, if you multiply your imprecise measurement by 2, that imprecision will be doubled too. Or if you raise the ISO even more, it'll be quadrupled and much, much worse. So whatever error is there is in measurement will be just exaggerated by doing that math. And while this was, of course, a very simplified version of how it really works, I guess you can see how the size of the pixels has an influence on image noise and on the precision in the tones. Now, of course, the question is Chris telling us that we should all go full frame from now on? And my answer is absolutely no, don't. Because, okay, 3 points. First, the differences aren't as huge as my explanation kind of implied. The size differences in your example between the Nikon D750 and the D7100, that size difference is between full frame and APS-C. That is not the difference between a bucket and a thimble. It's more like between a bucket and a slightly smaller bucket. So not as big in difference. And second, there are other factors that play into this. The quality of the camera's electronics, for example, is one. You can have expensive, very precise electronics in there, or cheaper stuff that isn't as good. And then there's stuff like the sensor shielding, which is another factor, or even the amount of heat that the battery dissipates has an influence on the noise in the photo. And then last but not least, smaller sensors are awesome. They have a lot of tricks up their sleeves that bigger sensors can't really do. And that's because optics. Now let's look at the crop factor first. A smaller sensor helps you with the telephoto range. Now you can buy a cheaper long telephoto lens without having to shell out as much money. That's awesome for wildlife photography, for example. That's awesome for sports photography, for example. Then, of course, smaller sensors give you more depth of field, which, again, landscapes photographers love. So they want everything in focus. Smaller sensors are usually also quicker to read out in your camera, which means that a smaller sensor will often allow you to shoot at a higher frame rates, higher frames per second, which again, wildlife or sports photographers love. So before you make the decision for or against a camera based on technical spec sheets, I would suggest you rent the camera for a weekend, play with it, and find out if it works well with your style of photography. And you will be surprised that the difference between different size pixels isn't as big as some reviews make it sound like. And that was it for this episode of Tips from the Top Floor. Thanks everyone for your support, and thanks to WeTransfer.com for supporting Tips from the Top Floor. Alright, this is the last call for the March Slack Photo Challenge. We're still accepting your photo submissions for the topic water, and at the end of March, I'll pick 3 of your photo and rip them to bits right here on the show. Just kidding. I'll be nice, promise. To participate, all you'll have to do is shoot a fresh photo about water and submit it to the TFTTF Slack. And if you're not a member of this wonderful TFTTF Slack community just yet, there's a link for you in the description of this episode. Music for the show by Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith. Silent partner Hans-Peter. Sorry, Jeff. Silent partner Hans-Peter Kagrud. Publishing and Slack challenges by Release Pixie. Matt Ramstetter Armstead. Slack invitations by Chief Invitation Officer CIO Rusty Russ. My name is Chris Marquardt. Follow me on all the social media. Also on Vero. I'm even on Vero. I'm everywhere. Even on Ello, I still have an account. No, follow me on Instagram because I'm about to return from my Arctic travels, and I'm definitely going to post a lot of photos once I'm back online. So check out my Instagram. Link is in the show notes. And of course, go out and take amazing photos. Be nice to each other. And happy shooting.